Hey, it's me, your boy Blue Gatsuga, and today we'll be doing a Yu-Gi-Oh! Tier analysis video. And yeah, I know it's been a while since I've done one of these. And the reason for the gap in uploads is because of work schedule issues. But again, some of you might not care about that. As well as the fact that I actually believed that the ban list was going to be dropping this week. But whatever. Anyways, let's get started. First off, we're going to be doing Rescue Ace. And for the pros, this deck has great monsters. Most of their monsters, with the exception of like one or two, are really good. And their boss monster is absolutely amazing and allows you to go +4. They have great spells and traps, which is again really nice when your boss monster could basically allow you to get through, basically allow you to get a bunch of them on the field for essentially free. This deck is consistent. It's a lot more consistent than when it first started off, because when it first started off, we didn't have emergency or any way to consistently get your hydrant onto the field and take advantage of the many spells and traps you could set to the field. Not to mention, it was a lot harder to actually get off Turbulence's effect. But now it's super easy, especially with emergency as well as like your impulse and your other cards. This deck is fairly versatile because you have effect negation, you have removal. You basically have many things you could actually do with this deck. I mean, I'm not going to say many because most of it is, again, like effect negation as well as monster removal in the form of, like, I think targeting and destruction. But aside from that, it's like you can get around most things in the game with this deck, as well as your lineup of spells and traps. And this deck has good recovery because almost any card can basically allow you to get back into the game since like some of your spells and traps, they float in itself. Plus, if you manage to get Turbulence out, which is really easy to do now, you can basically just get back into the game, and your opponent would have to work their way. Yeah, your opponent would actually have to start over with trying to demolish your board, but by then you could already outpace them and snowball them in advantage. And this deck can float, like I mentioned, the spells and traps they float. So that's just gonna give you more advantage to work with. And this deck can set up multiple disruptions because again you're just setting a bunch of spells and traps just off of Turbulence's effect alone. The cons, this deck is very rough going second because again this deck just likes to go first and set up a bunch of spells and traps, but if you do manage to go second, this deck is not completely hopeless going second, but you would much rather be going first with this deck. Also, this deck loses to cards like Evenly Matched, like, Lightning Storm, Feather Duster, Evenly Matched, because generally speaking, this deck isn't really going to be running any cards like the Solemns or any counter trap to actually stop cards like Evenly. If you get Evenly, you're just going to be in for a rough time. Anyways, for the stats, I'd give this deck a 3 out of 5 in power, a 4 out of 5 in defense, a 3.5 out of 5 in recovery, a 3 out of 5 in versatility, and a 4 out of 5 in consistency. And overall, I'd say that this deck is a tier 1.5 deck, or if you think I'm highballing it a little, you could argue that it might be a tier 2 deck. Anyways, tell me what you guys think about my assessment on Rescue Aces. Now on to T.G.s. T.G.s, they just recently got new support, and quite frankly, they're incredibly fun to play. So anyways, let's get started. For the pros, they have great monsters, they have great spells and traps, and they can swarm because the new spells and traps basically allow you to search and allow this deck to be a lot more consistent than it used to be. And almost all their monsters are essentially extenders, but granted, you have to have monsters on the field for you to be able to extend using them. With the exception of, I think, Screw Serpent, because Screw Serpent is basically, yeah, it's an ignition effect. But I don't know how to explain it, but like all the monsters basically get you a ton of value. Also, this deck can swarm, like I mentioned, because most of the monsters, they just like to special summon themselves from the hand or from the graveyard, and some of the monsters actually are able to float into other monsters, or they're able to summon other monsters with their effects. This deck can OTK because you could really spit out a bunch of synchro monsters. Because like not they got a new synchro monster that essentially acts like that one synchron that allows you to special summon a bunch of synchrons from the deck. But except this one is a lot better. I guess a lot better in quotes because it doesn't summon from the deck, but it does act as a soul charge for the deck. Also, this deck can set up multiple disruptions in the sense that because like some of your synchro monsters basically allow you to synchro summon on your opponent's turn. You could even say that this deck was the one that pioneered that gimmick of synchro summoning on your opponent's turn. So if you want to be a massive scumbag, you could summon Calamity on your opponent's turn. Or you could basically just summon any synchro monster that allows you to disrupt their plays. Not to mention, yeah, like this deck does Xeno lock you into T.G.s, but that's only on your turn. On your opponent's turn is a completely different story. Also, this deck is really consistent. They got like even more searchers, so it's like very hard not to get to the cards that you need. Not to mention, even prior to getting the two new searchers, you did also have a lot of other searchers. Like you had the generic searchers, since a lot of your T.G.s they do they are pretty, how do I put it? They are pretty diverse when it comes to the typing. So, you're going to have a lot of generic searchers that can search your different TG monsters. But now you have even more consistency. Also, this deck has decent protection because you also have counter traps. You also have, you have your counter traps. You have your cards that protect your monsters from being destroyed, and you also have ways to disrupt your opponent's plays. And for the cons, this deck generally cannot play through more than 2 negates. And I guess you could argue the other con is that this deck does Xeno lock you, so you can't really go and do any crazy things with this deck. That's the only reason why I'm saying that this deck is actually going to be a tier 2.5 deck. I could be wrong, but right now I'm just going to say it's a tier 2.5 deck. Because the TG extract monsters aren't anything extremely crazy. They're good, but they're not crazy. Anyways, for the stats, I'd give this deck a 3.5 out of 5, a 2.5 out of 5, a 3 out of 5, a 2 out of 5 in versatility, and for consistency, a 4 out of 5. Anyways, tell me what you guys think about Rescue Aces and TGs, and it's been me, your boy Blue Getziga, and I'm out.
You're